Washington politics and investigations, Russian aggression, North Korean missiles and nukes, wars, refugees, climate change, illegal immigration, mass shootings, #MeToo. If we watch the news long enough, we may start feeling that the future is hopeless. But some of us still believe our best days are yet to come. From an economic and humanitarian standpoint, some nations are thriving more than ever. Joining us now to set it straight is Gregg Easterbrook. He's author of a new book called It's Better Than It Looks, Reasons for Optimism in an Age of Fear. Gregg, thank you for joining us today. So with everything that's going on in Washington and around the world, how can anyone still be positive? Are you giving us false hope?
Hope not. But the fact that there are individual bad events, many of them all around our world, shouldn't obscure our knowledge of the larger arcs that are almost all positive. And everything that we can measure objectively, not your subjective feelings about the world, but the objective trends that are in play. News has been positive for years, if not for decades. All forms of pollution, except for greenhouse gases, that's a big exception, but except for greenhouse gases, all forms of pollution are in long-term decline. Despite the horror of school shootings, violent crime is in long-term decline. War, despite what you see on cable news, is in long-term decline, while education levels are rising, longevity is increasing, almost all forms of disease, including rates of cancer, are declining, discrimination's declining, freedom is increasing. By just about everything that can be measured, that's objective, life in the United States and Western Europe and in many other parts of the world gets steadily better.
And on a grand scale, Gregg, how long will this type of positivity last? How about other nations?
There's a lot to fear about the future, but the positive trends that we live in, not just in the United States and European Union, but especially actually a lot of the great progress in our world is happening in Asia and Africa. Those trends are at least decades long. Most of them date from the end of World War II, not every one of them, but most of them do. We're in our second to third generation of, in most of the world, not for everybody, but in most places, positive trends in most subject categories.
Okay, well, let's look at a few of these from your book. I know you list many positive changes and promising results like sanitation, transportation, education. Explain for us, do you have some more examples?
Sure. Well, health is a key one that we tend to overlook because we take modern healthcare for granted. Since the late 19th century, almost everywhere in the world, longevity has been rising with each passing generation. In fact, it's close to spooky. Every decade, about 3 months is added to the projected lifespan of new children that are being born. Right now, at the beginning of here's an example for the United States. At the beginning of the 20th century, average lifespan of the United States was 46 years. At the beginning of the 21st century, average lifespan in the United States was 74 years. We're on track now to have an average lifespan at the beginning of the 22nd century of almost 100 years. And all this has happened despite, these numbers include the horrors of World War II, they include the AIDS epidemic and many other public health emergencies, and they expand exactly the same numbers I just gave you, but for most of the rest of the world, including very troubled countries, including Afghanistan, life expectancy steadily grows longer.
How about education? Are we seeing a more educated populace around the world?
Yes, education levels keep rising. The United States now, 29% of its citizens hold some kind of college degree, either 2-year, 4-year, or master's degree. That's the highest it's ever been in the United States. It's one of the highest numbers in world history. There's a few countries that are even better. South Korea, something like 35% of its citizens hold a college degree. And in that case, many of them are postgraduate degrees, master's degrees, and above. More important for the whole of the human family, which is now, hard to believe, keep this in mind, 7 billion souls in the human family, is that in the last 2 generations, dramatic increase in ability to read and write. 15% of members of the human family could read and write at the end of World War II. Now it's 85%, and it's well on its way to 90%. And really dramatic increase in education for girls and young women, who in many countries, as recently as a generation ago, received little, if any, education outside the home, and now in almost all countries receive at least an elementary education and are on their way to receiving the equivalent of high school educations as well.
Despite all the good news that you shared, how about the challenges that we're still facing today? And do you have any feasible suggestions to tackle these matters?
Yes, I devoted an entire chapter, and It's Better Than It Looks, to the practical things that can be done about climate change, not to blue sky crazy ideas, but practical ideas. And the key point that I make in this chapter is that greenhouse gas emissions are fundamentally an air pollution problem. And the two previous big air pollution problems, smog and acid rain, were both corrected much faster and much more cheaply than anyone expected. I think the same thing can be done with greenhouse gases, and I spell out a reform agenda, and It's Better Than It Looks. Inequality, I have a chapter on that. I think that's a tougher nut to crack. I think there will probably never be a human society that's not unequal in some way because we're all born with different abilities and talents. But I think we can fix the financial side of inequality so that people who didn't attend a college, and today right now about 40% of people who could be in college or could have been in college have had some college time. It'll probably never be 100%. So we have to change society in ways that if you didn't attend college, that in an ever more education-focused society, you can still find an important and satisfactory role. And I think that's actually a harder challenge than fixing climate change, but I think that can be fixed too. And I spell out a reform agenda for it in the book.
Okay, I guess it's just a matter of how you look at it. Is the glass half full or half empty? So Gregg Easterbrook, author of a new book called It's Better Than It Looks, Reasons for Optimism in an Age of Fear. Thanks so much for your insights today.
Sure, happy to talk to you.